Catherine, Marina and Alena, who are going to speak to us about Labour and the global stage. So Catherine, as you all know, is a fantastic pro-European and a Member of Parliament and our Shadow Minister for Europe and the Americas, and is a great friend of ours, both in ideological terms and just as people and as an organisation. And Alena, I know used to work at Global Justice Now under the Europe is Possible, the Labour for Free movement, and maybe she still does. I'm not entirely sure, but she'll tell us that when she gets going. And thank you so much for joining us, Alena. And Marina, as you know, if you're on the beginning of the call, is Greek and is a senior lecturer in media and politics at the University of East Anglia, and a former spokesperson for Greek party Syriza, and is also a great friend of ours. So without further ado, Catherine, I'll come across to you. And please tell us what you've been up to and your view on current events, and then also your view on, how Labour, I guess in a way, how Labour handles foreign policy moving forward, but then also what our view is on the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And it's really lovely to be on an all-women panel. And I'm sure that's very much part of the way that you run things, is to have an equalities-based approach to things. And so it's a delight, especially when you're in a parliament in the UK where you have, a culture which is sometimes challenging around women and equalities. And you have a lot of some of the newer Tory MPs who seem to boast about their unequal approach or lack of equalities approach to their own politics. Now, I'm very pleased to be here to be speaking at the Labour for a European Future conference, and I do look forward to next year when we can be in person and have a nice lunch somewhere. And I think it's such a fantastic opportunity, given that the G7 is happening at the same time, with the pretty Cornish background and the tune of sea shanties. Actually, the summit starts at a very intense and crucial diplomatic summer for the UK, with a chance to show leadership in the build-up to Glasgow COP26 climate change summit, and indeed at such a time of change. If we look back at the last G7 summit in 2019, the world has changed beyond all recognition. Mr. Trump is on his way out, thank goodness, and there is a renewed sense of cooperation. However, there is actually an exception to that, of course, and the sticking point, which has come up in the last 2 days, is the Northern Ireland Protocol. The government appears to have forgotten that it was the second party to a two-party strategy on Northern Ireland. And we do see the rising threat of, if Mr. Johnson continues to refuse to comply with international law and something he himself signed up to, that the EU could impose retaliatory tariffs, and that would have even more of an impact than we've already seen on UK-EU trade. And many of us will have had people write to us regarding the lack of products arriving or in the UK, or perhaps things that they've been waiting for weeks and weeks for due to the problem with logistics. The EU proposes a Swiss-style deal to resolve the situation. But of course, Mr. Johnson refuses this on the grounds that it would prevent future trade deals. Now, it was so refreshing to hear President Biden cut through the whole thing and commit that a UK-EU food alignment would be no barrier to a US-UK trade deal, which is basically a major concession given the size of the US food lobby. And I do hope that, given that he's been embarrassed, really, being the politician on the naughty step in the last 48 hours, because this démarche, which was issued, is really diplomatic language for a reprimand or an objection. It's not just a statement of the US government's position. There is also a sense that it's really normally reserved for, a country that you don't get on with very well. So there's been lots of sort of trying to smooth things down. But we do know that diplomats have said that there was a sense of inflaming tensions in Ireland and Europe, with the UK's opposition to checks at ports in the province. So, as we're all aware as well, and I know Mike is very aware of this. We do have the marching season coming up next month in Belfast, and this could actually lead to a really difficult period. And I'm very pleased that my colleague Lou Haig has been working way in advance of July, so that she's been putting almost the government on notice that this could well pick away at the Good Friday Agreement. I think the language and the debate will continue to ratchet up until the 1st of July, which is the date. And we know that Johnson likes to allow these things to run right up to the date of the 1st of July. And then we'll see whether he actually gives way, because he's done that in the past where he's allowed to ratchet right up. And, you know, to be fair, the EU often does that as well. But I think in the case of Northern Ireland, where it is so sensitive and where Arlene Foster's already had to resign over the, you know, a sense that is there, you know, the troubles sort of returning, and I would sincerely hope that isn't, but there is that feeling in the air. So I'm sure that Mr. Johnson will allow it to run and run, and then somehow it won't be his fault when things start to deteriorate in Northern Ireland. So not only since the G7 summit in 2019 has the UK formally left the EU, there have been further tensions with Russia over Ukraine and Belarus, of course, the stolen election and the serious unrest and repression of women leaders. And of course, further afield, questions over Europe's relationship with China, the ongoing concerns around suppression of democracy and human rights in Hong Kong, and the ongoing concerns in the Xinjiang region of China. So we have a number of challenges facing us internationally, and not least the outbreak and spread of COVID. Now, it's funny because, you know, as a shadow Europe minister, you would have thought I would have jetted off and been to Athens and other places. But of course, all I've been doing is going from my home in North London into Parliament and into my constituency. But I do think that this shared experience of the awful grief and trauma of coronavirus has to some degree brought us closer as an international community. Now, and certainly Donald Trump's era of America First looks absolutely ridiculous in the context of tackling coronavirus. So it's wonderful to see the US rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, taking action to put the US at the heart of the battle to vaccinate the planet. And I do welcome the 100 million vaccine donations, which Mr. Johnson has referred to. And of course, it is the worst timing in the world for the UK to be scrapping its 0.7% commitment to international aid. We saw the tragedy in India unfolding, whereby the Serum Institute had steadfastly provided the UK and other countries with the basic ingredients for vaccinations, and yet find itself in a terrible conflict between trying to vaccinate its own citizens and keep up with the demands of the international community for the special ingredients for vaccinations. And that is where we see we are completely tied in globally to one another. And of course, this unholy row that is really within the Tory party, because Labour's always been clear that the 0.7% commitment is a way of managing global insecurity, whether that's over climate change, whether that's over far right or Islamism, whether that's through a number of other challenges that we face either in Africa or Asia. It's absolutely crucial that we work together internationally. And yet we're seeing Mr. Johnson, because he wants to curry favour with certain political chums, that we're seeing this taking away important funding for the WASH program, which is crucial to hygiene for the developing countries, and of course a number of other global challenges. Now, very briefly, Mike, because I know that I'm coming to the end of my 7 minutes, I wanted really just to say that I'm so pleased that there's been this coalition of charities, NGOs, and even US congressmen and women joining the call for the government to be more holistic, for the UK government to be more holistic, to drop its plans on aid. And I think it ties in very nicely with our values as pro-Europeans. Now, how do we make the current circumstances and the debates in the G7 tie in with what we as the Labour Party believe in and our strong values? So the challenges and the opportunities that we face must be key to the discussions which Annalise Dodds is leading on rebuilding our economy, restoring pride in our communities, and protecting and expanding Britain's influence and standing on the world stage. We are committed to be an outward-looking government, as opposed to currying favour with our political chums, and we're committed to Europe. It makes absolutely no sense with the challenge that we face, for example, around Ukraine, Belarus, and the cyber attacks and the destabilising impact of the dark web and some of the actors coming out of Russia. Whether they're aligned completely to the government, it's difficult to know, but that's where that has to start, that relationship to hold Mr. Putin to account. And I'm very pleased that there will be a discussion in Geneva later next week so that President Biden can really, together, I hope, with Mr. Johnson, hold Russia to account on some of those questions. As to Gordon Brown's statement on rejoining the EU, it's not the current position under Keir Starmer. The feeling is that, and as Lisa has outlined, we must work first of all on priorities of making the case for an international approach, but trying also to make it fit into some of our more regionally unequal scenarios, such as the stagnant wages, the long-term uninvestment, the loss of well-paid manufacturing jobs, and that persistent regional inequality which we do see in the UK, which of course undermines the work that we're doing internationally. So we do have to, and I'm sure some of you have noticed in Lisa and Andy's speeches, making the case for why the international work is so important to resolving regional inequality here in the UK. So Mike, it's been great to speak to colleagues, and I'm on the call for another hour, so very pleased to have an opportunity to reply to questions. And could I strongly encourage colleagues on the call to get involved for conference so that we can continue this debate and we can continue the challenge which we have got about how we make our international work make sense right down at grassroots levels. Thank you.
I'm on mute, sorry about that. I was just saying thank you, Catherine. That was great, as always, and encouraging and hopeful, as always. So thank you so much. Marina, we'll come straight across to you, please.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if we have met. We should have met. I am a member of the Labour Party, and I want to start with what Catherine was saying. Catherine, right now in the Labour Party, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. If you have any jobs for me, let me know. And for the conference and for anything. So, and I'll tell you why I don't know, because this outward looking of the Labour Party, since the local elections, that's not what I perceived. And I will come back to that in a minute. So what I thought that I would like to talk about today is a little bit about the perception of Britain in the outside world. And it is quite negative right now. It has been negative since the referendum. Now we have research that proves how negative it is across Europe. And this has to do, of course, with a lot of incidents that we had since Brexit. It has to do with the racist incidents that we had, which all of them for Europe, they point to xenophobia. We have, and I was talking to the Greek media, for example, what they were asking me quite a lot is about Scotland and what is going to happen in Scotland, which again gives a very particular perception, which is true actually, which is internal divisions, a country that is not united. It has to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol as well, which gives and how it is dealt by the Boris Johnson government, which is so amazingly negative and this is how it is perceived, not only from the power centers in Europe, but from the people of Europe as well. So generally, the image of Britain in the outside world is not very good. And then there are questions about how we will move forward. Catherine mentioned a lot and mapped out very nicely a lot of the issues related to that. But what I wanted to say is that we should not forget that foreign policy has to do with soft power as well. And soft power, it's about values, it's about culture, it's about foreign policy and the power that we have to influence things. So soft power is about our global profile. And right now, the profile of Britain, as I said, is not that of a serious player, which it used to be very, very dominant when it comes to soft power as well. Of course, all this have to do with the Boris Johnson government and how it approaches all these issues, also with COVID as well, and we will see how things will happen. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the soft power and what has gone wrong in terms of the policies from the Tory government. You have heard the stories about musicians, which had problems with visas and accessing the EU. There we are talking about a 5.8 billion industry that they are trying to destroy. But it's not only the economic side of it, it's also what Britain means for the rest of the world in cultural terms, in music terms, and most of us, we grew up with British music, even if I was in Greece. Probably I knew back then when I was growing up in Greece more about British music than possibly Greek music as well. That's how and this is very, very important. It also has to do with universities and the people like me that we talk to other people and we explain ideas. And this is not only happening in Britain, but Britain, we start from Britain and we move around and we talk to the rest of the world. And the universities have been hit so hard from Brexit. This is another big industry, universities. It brings, I think, something like 65 million a year to British economy, but that's not the only point. It is that Britain was an important force in terms of intellectual activity everywhere around the world, and now it's not like that. And then we have, of course, what we expect in universities, that very soon a lot of departments will close down. You can say this is the outcome of the pandemic, but it doesn't have to do with the pandemic. It has to do with having a government which is determined not to allow people to have opinions and study. And this is why what they want to close down is, and they have started, they're in the process, is departments that they have to do with humanities and social sciences, which is where all the critical thought is coming from. So we are talking about, from my perspective, a terrible, terrible, bleak future with this government in all these terms. And as I said, the way that Britain is projecting itself in the global stage. I want to conclude by saying something, though, about the Labour Party and the position of the Labour Party and all that. As I said, my perception has changed quite a lot since the local elections. And the reason for that, it was because of the discussion around the red wall. So we have to admit that there are certain taboos within the Labour Party, which actually, I believe, they are blocking the outward cosmopolitan role of the Labour Party, and how the Labour Party, even in these conditions, they could project something different in the global scene. So all the discussion around the local elections was about the red ball. This was taken from European media because I was talking to European media about that and what the red ball means and so on. And we have to accept that the red ball has a very strange geography. It covers certain parts, but not others. Certain areas of the north, but not others. And always when it is spoken as in a nostalgic term, which goes back to the Industrial Revolution. I'm sorry to say that we are not there anymore. We have moved from the Industrial Revolution, and there are other revolutions that they have happened, like the Information Revolution. So when the Labour Party is talking about the investment that it has to happen on these areas that for years they have been marginalized and hit economically and so on, it shouldn't be on industrial terms, in my view. It should be on the new terms, the new societies that we have. So you need training in terms of information, of technologies and so on, much more than you need a new factory. And of course, in the global stage, you have China as well, and you will have to compete there, and there are other considerations. So all the discussion after the local elections was around the red wall. What that meant is that where Labour is strong, and is strong internally for Britain, but also for what it's projecting outside in the global scene, we forget to celebrate. We forgot to celebrate London and the mayor of London. We forgot to celebrate Manchester, which is on the north, but not on the red wall, because as I said, this wall is a very strange wall. It moves around quite a lot. And we didn't celebrate Manchester. We didn't celebrate as Labour members all these successes that we had during the local elections. And I think these areas, and well, we like it or not, London is a center for soft power. A lot of the things that are happening in London, it is what is projected in the global scene. So we have Labour, us, and we didn't celebrate that we are cosmopolitans, that London, the center of culture, of activity, of cosmopolitanism, is staying with Labour. And the same goes for a lot of other areas in Britain, as I said, like Manchester. I mean, we didn't celebrate Manchester because we have these preconceptions about which parts of Britain are important and which not. It seemed that London wasn't very important, so we didn't celebrate that. So I want to conclude with that. I think there is a need for a change of perception within the Labour Party as well. We cannot afford to forget to celebrate our own successes that if we want to think that we are going to be a government in a few years, this is what is played in the global scene. Culture, the intellectual production, the artistic production of the country, which makes Britain what it is, a very important center and a very big player in terms of soft power around the world. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marina. As always, that's really encouraging and challenging to hear at the same time. Alena, we'll come across to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you again. So yeah.
Thanks for inviting me, Mike. I'm going to start by pre-apologizing if my connection gets a bit dodgy. Sometimes the connection freezes, but this is kind of the only space I have at the moment because my partner is working in the other room. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It is great to see Catherine again, and also Marina. I think the last time Marina and I spoke and shared the stage on an event, it was in 2019, I think, in Hammersmith at the local meeting where we were advocating for the people's vote. And it was a very small and perfectly formed gathering. where we basically talked ourselves into the depth of the depression about the state of the world, and then talked ourselves out of it again to some sort of optimism of the will position. But I really hope that today we're not going to go that deep. We'll stay with the optimism bit only. And just on what Marina said just now, I think the red wall as a term didn't really exist. No one was talking about the red wall before the 2019 election campaign, really. And we got played by the media, essentially, that we adopted this terminology even. Not to say that we should not discuss communities that have been ignored for investment, but we should discuss this in ways that take account of the demographics of those areas, of the economic background of people that live in those areas, and not adopt some kind of a really crude geographical division that doesn't serve us, doesn't serve the labor movement, and it definitely doesn't serve the people who actually live in those areas, because it doesn't really tell us anything about them or their problems or what they need. But anyway, that's about the red wall, and we're here to talk about the global stage and where the labor movement is on that, and labor where our place is. Whenever I'm asked to speak at these events, I assume it's because it's from a campaigning perspective, because that's what I do. So it's great that we've had Catherine and Marina to give us a kind of a deeper analysis. For me, this question of where labor's place is in the global stage, it's actually quite easy to answer. I think the answer is where it wants to be, because on a number of the key issues that we've mentioned already, the climate crisis, of course, but also the rise of authoritarianism, of Islamophobia and racism across the world, our current government, the Tory government, has either vacated the stage, or it's actually in the driving seat, or it's aiding and abetting the perpetrators of these right-wing shifts. So in that sense, there is as much space as Labour wants to speak to and with the rest of the world about these massive challenges. So that space is open for us, and we can be better at building alliances on those terms. And I guess it's very difficult to look at these massive problems and think of them as opportunities. But I guess there are opportunities in so much as we want to be the people that are looking for solutions. And the biggest crisis at the moment is obviously the pandemic. And it's absolutely right that the Labour Party should be focusing on the pandemic response of the UK government and all the ways it has failed hundreds of thousands of families, despite the obvious successes of the vaccination program. And it's obvious that we should be speaking to the people who have suffered, who have sacrificed economically, as well as with their lives and with their health. But we should also not lose focus of the fact that the pandemic is very much still the #1 issue for huge parts of the rest of the world. So, for example, the number of deaths so far this year has already exceeded the number of deaths globally we had last year. It might not necessarily feel that way in the UK, because thank God, we're doing much better now with the vaccination program. But the huge majority of global South countries are really struggling. So I think we should be much more forceful as a party, not only to demand action from the UK government, but also to expose the hypocrisy of some of the actions. Catherine mentioned, for example, the 100 million vaccine donation pledged by the UK government. But the truth is that even the whole amount that the G7 together pledging, the 1 billion, it's not enough, because it's not happening soon enough. The issue with the global access to vaccines, for example, cannot really be solved with donations. it's about access and manufacturing capacity. And that could happen if the UK government got off the fence and actually supported the proposal that India and South Africa have put forward at the World Trade Organization, something that the US is backing. So once again, we're actually to the right of the US administration, something that we're not used to. But I think we will have to become used to in the next years, because of at least the rhetoric of the Biden administration. And that's a place where the Labour Party should really be very vocal in support of the progressive proposals that are coming from them, and try and build some alliances on which it can rely in future, hopefully in government. And then the other thing that the UK government is kind of focusing on is actually trade. So we talked about the problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it's no surprise that the UK government is currently desperate to get some sort of a post-Brexit trade deal that it can, it can parade as a great success, as an example of this new global Britain that they're trying to build, even though Britain currently under the Tories is more insular than it's been in ages. And what they're pushing for currently right now is this trade deal with Australia. And why should we care about that? Well, because even though the economic impact, the economic benefits of such a deal are minuscule, and even our own Department of International Trade admits that, it's something like a fraction of a percent over 15 years. So it's a margin of error in any calculation, really. But it's about what this deal signifies. And unfortunately, what this deal signifies is something that we have been warning for the last 5 years, and that was called Project Fear. But just because it was labeled as that doesn't mean that we should stop talking about it, because it's actually at our doorstep now. So this is a trade deal that is going to basically include the so-called corporate courts. And that means the UK can wave goodbye on its climate commitments, because we've seen globally that over half of the cases that have been lodged with corporate courts are corporations suing governments on climate action or on environmental legislation or regulations. So this is kind of even though the economic impact is small, the intersection between various issues that we really should be focusing and talking about right now is exemplified in the Australia trade deal, for example. So that's something that I think the Labour movement, campaigners, members of the Labour Party should be focusing a lot more, lobbying and making noise about. So that's number one suggestion for me as a campaigner. And then obviously we should be looking at climate action, and the UK's hosting of the COP in Glasgow, and what we can do, what we can prepare, how we can present even the Labour Party as a kind of an alternative to this bogus leadership on climate that Boris Johnson is presenting. I mean, the man flew Cornwall. And that didn't happen because he's an idiot. That happened because that's a statement that he's making. He flew to Cornwall. He took his picture on that plane, and then he proceeded to talk about actions that he's hoping the G7 countries will agree on the climate. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about what kind of actions and what kind of an agenda, and how applicable, how committed they are to it. So again, I think there's very much space for Labour to present an alternative to that and to occupy an alternative space there. I'm not necessarily talking about organising barricades in Glasgow at the COP, but I think we should be thinking about some bolder actions and preemptive preemptive campaigns on this, really. I think we should be talking to people a lot more about the climate and obsessing a lot less about, these kind of regional divisions that, as I said, don't really represent the material reality of people. It's just something that someone in the right-wing press came up with, beat Labour with. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that, because I do want us to discuss some of these things, and I want us to have a conversation about where our campaigning opportunities are. But I think there's definitely a lot of space and a lot of alliances to be built for the Labour Party and for us as Labour supporters and members.
Off mute. There we go. Thank you so much. That was great. It's always good to hear from you. And thank you so much to all three of you. Three really interesting and very different perspectives as well on where we are. So we've got about 20 minutes now for questions. I think someone's posted, there were a couple in the chat. I'll have a look back through those. But if others have questions, if you could raise your hand using the button in the reactions tab, not the participants tab, but that would be great. Right, Alan, go ahead. Take you off mute. There you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for organising this, and thank you to all the three speakers. My commiserations, especially to Catherine West, because I think you've got the worst job on the Labour front bench, because to be honest, I'm not quite sure what you're allowed to say. I get the impression that your sympathies are not quite with the official policy. And when I try to think, what is our official policy? It's simply to say, well, we respect the vote that was taken earlier this year to leave the European Union and to sign up to this horrible agreement. And I'm not sure that's a very vote-catching sort of policy to promote. I'm old enough to remember campaigning in 1979 against Margaret Thatcher, and also for Europe, incidentally. And when Margaret Thatcher won her landslide victory, of course, Labour Party respected that victory, but we didn't agree with it. And we didn't have to say, well, it's done and we have to live it. No, we fought and finally got back to power again. And I think the same goes for Brexit. Of course, we respect the vote, but we don't agree with it. We don't agree with it. It was a mistake. And we should be proud and to say so. And in my view, we should be more robust. So I was very heartened, like Mike, about what Gordon Brown said this week. Anyway, apart from all that moaning, one proposal I have, and it's also because I'm very worried about what's happening in Northern Ireland and Scotland for obvious reasons. And I don't know what the Labour Party policy for Northern Ireland or Scotland is either, frankly. But what I would suggest is that if the Labour Party at least campaigned for our membership of the European Economic Union,
yes,
and thereby coming back into the customs union and the single market, not only would this be, I think, a very good sign in general for our strategic policy of rejoining the European Union, but it would resolve the current problems we have in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. And it would resolve the current problems that Labour has in those two nations, because we don't have a policy there. And let's remember that in Scotland, for instance, the policy of the Scottish government was actually membership of the European Economic Union. So I think we would have a much stronger position if we actually campaigned for membership of the European Economic Union, not only in terms of getting back into the European Union, but also in terms of resolving problems within the United Kingdom itself. And I just hope that the Labour Party could be a bit more robust. Thank you.
yes.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Alan. Keith, do you have a question?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to activate of Catherine a very specific question. Do we have a strategy on the Northern Ireland Protocol for the next few months? Are we going to pressure the government on it, or are we going to do what we did with the Brexit negotiations, which was allow Johnson to run the clock down and stew in his own juices? Or are we going to actually pressure the issue?
Great, straight across to you, Catherine.
Thank you for those two questions. Firstly, on Scotland, I was very pleased to see that in the by-election for Airdrie and Shotts, which was held after the local elections because the MP was elected to the as an MSP, that Labour did have 6% increase in the vote share. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but that is many more people deciding to vote Labour. And I think that we have refreshed the offer in Scotland. I think Anas is a very good communicator, and I think he has a way both of encouraging, Labour voters who are thinking about more domestic policy, but I also know that he is, very open-minded on the Europe question as well. And I'm pleased that we are seeing a bit more of an improvement in our fortunes there. Ian Murray sits on the shadow front bench and is in around the table at the cabinet and making the case for Scotland. We all know in this call it would be very difficult for us to win the Westminster Parliament without Scotland. So we obviously need to make more of a showing there and put more resource there. The Scottish Labour Party is now its own party as well, which gives it more sort of freedom to be outspoken about issues. On the broader picture of Europe, which was raised in the initial question, the Labour's position is not to rejoin currently. Gordon Brown is as free as a bird to say what he likes. And I think for many of us who fought those difficult 5 years, and it is coming up to the 23rd of June, when Lisa is going to make a speech about where we're at in terms of foreign policy. But I think we know what she is going to say, which is that we have to make the case for being outwardly focused as a country in our regions. So part of that is communicating to our voters our ideas and our dream. People vote for dreams. And I think in the Hartlepool by-election, where obviously I worked for a day, I didn't see any unpleasantness or anybody slamming the door. I just felt that they didn't really know. There wasn't a compelling reason to get people to the polls. And so I'm hoping that while we focus on regional England, which is where we cannot shy away from the fact that we have to win back those seats. And I know that, other speakers have said that, it's wonderful that we've won in Manchester and Bristol. Of course it is. And I would be very worried if Andy Burnham and Marvin Rees were not winning at the moment, or Sadiq Khan, who personally, I've campaigned for and been a very good friend to Europeans here in London and set up the European Hub, which is helping with all sorts of legal rights and so on. But we also do have to speak to our regions about the importance of being externally focused. So that is still, the dream still needs to get into, a soundbite. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but that's why we're having meetings like today, so that we can take on board what members say, and we can refashion our approach, and we can speak in terms of a dream of an outwardly focused nation, which is not concerned to tell, for example, booing English fans that they're wrong. We have a Prime Minister who is just letting that go. It is reminiscent of the Trump moment when he said he equalised both the far right and the protesters who were worried about, the fact that the US wasn't having a proper debate about its past around slavery. And you can see that President Biden now has no qualms about talking about those issues. And yet we can see Boris Johnson deliberately allowing some people who are basically acting in an appalling way. I mean, this is an international competition, and we have people booing our own team because they're a diverse team and they're putting on the line their beliefs. These are young sportsmen, and yet we have a Prime Minister who thinks somehow he shouldn't be condemning the booing. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. So, and I'm confident that we will win in the end, because in our regions, decent values do hold. But it just doesn't help when the most senior politician in the country sort of allows a little bit of a doubt that that's okay. So this is the sort of value that we have to stand up on. And in a way, it's the same argument around our future, our economic future. And of course, coronavirus has really demonstrated why, you know, the freewheeling trade deals with Australia and so on are so problematic. I mean, you can't even leave Heathrow at the moment. So, you know, I think we will get there in the end. This process that we're undertaking now, and of course, Annalise is going to be leading the policy review, it's all part of putting together our offer for the election, whether it's 2023 or 2024. It has to be by the end of 2024, and it must be more compelling than what we've had in the last couple of months, which is almost a sort of a half-baked cake, which nobody wants to eat. And so obviously I'll putting my voice in there about being outwardly focused, being proud of the work that we've done in developing countries, but also the importance of linking that in with people's experience of insecure work, of jobs where you go along, there's no proper paid maternity leave, there's no proper holiday pay, all the things which trouble so many people who are living in very, very disadvantaged parts of the country. The increase in food banks, you know, that is linked in very closely with the fact that our economy is 4% smaller as a result of leaving the European Union. And then compounded by the incompetent handling of the coronavirus, and the lack of funding for the NHS, the lack of investment in our facilities outside of London, the 5 million people waiting for a cancer operation. So all those elements, I'm sure you agree with, but it's how we put that together and how we communicate the dream of a better future. So, you know, I don't have all the answers yet. We haven't started the policy review, but please be part of that policy review, and, you know, impress upon Annalise how we put into these terms an offer which is irresistible in the 2023 election. And also, as colleagues have said on the call, get involved in your local CLP, get involved in your branches, make the case for, you know, pride externally, and a way that we can communicate which doesn't trip us up as we set out on what is going to be quite a challenging 18 months towards the next election.
Alena, did you want to comment on Scotland? Because I think you're in Glasgow, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a very recent adopted Scot. I moved here mid-December, yeah, in the middle of the pandemic, because why not? I have to say, I think the situation with Labour in Scotland is, I think it's a very tricky one, because there is a sense, yes, to an extent, I would agree with Catherine, and obviously I also understand why she would, you know, give the best possible comments for the work of Scottish Labour. And I do think that there is a sense of a modest revival in some areas. But I also have to say, from, yeah, again, a very recent kind of local observer of the political process here, there's also equally a sense that, as good as some of the Labour candidates are, people have switched off from the Labour Party. So there is I'm not a huge fan of the SNP at all, but they seem to be getting some of that kind of domestic progressive agenda from them. So they are getting their emphasis on the NHS, on funding for everything from social care to dentistry, and more focus on education, even though the SNP have failed on education, from the SNP. And they're getting their pro-European content from the SNP and from the Greens as well. And it leaves the Labour candidates, I think, in a very difficult position, and where they've had the opportunity to criticise the work that local representatives of the SNP and other parties have failed to do, then I think they've done pretty well. But left to just the Labour messaging, I don't think that's cutting through. I think there is too much, there's too much other noise that's drowning it out, and there isn't enough to make Labour stand out. I mean, that's my reading of the Labour campaign for the definitely for the Scottish elections that just passed. And I suppose it's also a pandemic, so everything is slightly different. But I'm very worried about Labour's long-term chances in Scotland, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Marina, we'll come to you in a second, but we're coming up on time. As we'll take the next 3 questions. If you could be brief, Terence, Pervez, and David, and then I'll come to each of the panelists with to answer those questions and then final comments. Terence, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a case for being more positive about Europe. A previous intervener mentioned an associate relationship. And if you look at Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland, that they're all sort of top of the league in the level of GDP they have there. I mean, Switzerland incredibly prosperous as well. So it's a matter of associating being in the EU with prosperity for the UK, particularly as the Bank of England is forecasting that the economy will shrink now. And there are all these rights, particularly free movement rights, we could try to get back for people, not just musicians, but performers generally, and for students to go and work in Europe and to come here, and for people, say, in construction to be able to continue to go and work in places like Germany where wages are good.
Great, thank you, Terence. Pervez.
Oh,
He's still on mute, I'm afraid.
hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Mike, for organizing this lovely meeting. I think I live in one of those, urban areas. I live in East Ham, and I'm a community businessman. And what I'm witnessing, the suffering of businesses, is not only by the COVID. It's like post-Brexit, a lot of European labor, they have gone out of London. They went back to their own countries. And not only NHS, it's like building trade and, like normal businesses, they're suffering for lack of labor, skilled labor. And some other things like, building materials and stuff like basic needs, prices are going up. But these things are not being addressed in a wider media, or, it's not been presented to our community. So I think my question to Catherine is how we can, enhance this kind of awareness that the impacts is not only been made for Ireland. Ireland, of course, is a major dispute, but in wider England and Scotland and other areas is the Brexit is making a serious impact, and that's common people like ourselves. We are suffering for as a result of Brexit. This is one question. Another question is the emotion about Brexit. There is a very negativity within the British people for European community, and for European people for British community as well. I mean, which was being reflected in Eurovision. I mean, this is for the first time that we have seen that our contestant has got 0 vote, which is very surprising. How we can kind of improve the relations with our European neighbors emotionally? I think this is my second question. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Pervez. And David, your question, if you could be brief, that would be great.
Is this me? Yes. I've had a blast to Catherine direct about the Australia agreement, because we don't want to see that there is they allow for shipment of live sheep, as they did in 1979, I think it was, in their Gulf Agreement. And there's a loss of life on sheep being transported from Australia to the Gulf, somewhere around 50%. Terrifying. I hope that our trade team are talking to the Australian Labor Party about that trade deal. I wanted quickly just to raise one other question from Oxford, where we've actually got Labour in coalition with the Lib Dems and the Greens, controlling, for God's sake, Oxfordshire County Council. Now, we don't quite know, but I suspect that things like attitudes on health for animal health, animal welfare, I think, may have played a small part. But surely we've got to start thinking, if not before PR, let's at least look at tactical deals. We're in danger of losing Buckley and Spen for various reasons, but for God's sake, couldn't we have done a deal? Did we really need to fight Amersham? I'm sure a deal would have been possible, and we could have had one in Buckley and Spen safely and had an anti-Tory win in Cheshire. But we've got to talk about these subjects. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, if you want to take those three and then final comments, that would be great. Marina, I'll come to you first.
Yes, couple of things. I agree with Catherine. I don't think rejoining the EU is going to happen soon. It's not because of what we are going to say, but we've seen that these are long processes. I don't think we are there yet. And I agree that we should go on talking about Europe and emphasize what you told me when I was talking about the trouble I have to get to Greece, that we are Europeans. That's why I was talking a lot about soft power. Now, there is a problem, I think, with the Labour Party and how a lot of the policies and what we are projecting outside is framed. And the problem is that we assume that people are taking rational decisions. If it was rational decisions, we wouldn't have Brexit. We wouldn't have been there. It doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. Economically, culturally, we hear all the negative stories about the strawberries, that they are not picked up, daffodils, that they are not picked up, and so on. So Brexit didn't make sense if you're thinking rationally. But people are not voting only rationally. Emotion that somebody mentioned is a very big part of that. Now, I think, and I can say that because I'm just a member of the Labour Party, as things stand today, we cannot inject this emotion on people. We fail to do that, I mean. Instead, I think we focus a lot on competence and showing that we can manage if we were in government. I mean, who would ever think that Boris Johnson can manage anything? The guy cannot manage to, I don't know, whatever you would give him to do. I don't think this is a guy who can manage anything. And yet, playing on emotion, manipulating emotion and Brexit and all this negative sentiment that it had to do with other things, and it was projected to the EU, he managed to be in government. So I think we need a shift in the Labour Party from this strategy of trying to show that we are competent, to understand the importance of emotions, pro-European emotions as well, and try to find the soundbite that it will capture not the minds of the people, but the hearts of the people. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marina. Thank you so much for joining. Alena, I'll come to you.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot. I understand why, given the group of people that we are, and the organization and kind of purpose of this meeting, I see why people feel frustration over the rhetoric. I don't think it's just about the rhetoric around Europe, though. I think silence at one point becomes lack of policy, and that is a bit worrying, because I think I forgot who it was, but the gentleman from London is right. There are a lot of actual real life negative impacts that small businesses, big businesses, and everyone really is beginning to feel from Brexit. And we do need a way of speaking to people about what is currently happening to them. And we can't just shy from the word Brexit or the word EU, because it's still our biggest trading partner. So still a lot of the things that happen in our lives will depend on it. But I also think the other point that the same speaker made about bad faith and bad feeling is very important, because if we think that the UK public is not taking decisions rationally and people are swayed by emotion, I mean, the same goes for the EU and for European countries. And the EU is not some bastion of reason where the UK has lost its head. These processes operate in a similar way across countries and across governments. And so bad faith and the lack of kind of remedial action that I guess could be Labour's role in the background. You know, Labour could be reaching out in the background and trying to do damage control and some repair work and some soft power to try and appease some of these, tense situations. That in itself, I think, is a good approach and a good way of kind of preparing the ground, because as we've said many times, this is a long ride. The impacts of Brexit and our future relationship with the European Union is going to be a process. It's not a thing that happens once and then we stop talking about it. It's something that will develop for years to come, and we will have to continue talking about it. And the challenge is to find maybe a more imaginative and more emotional way of discussing this with people, because we'll have to discuss this with people for the next 15-20 years.
We will. Great, thank you, Alena. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Catherine, very much, well, not least, but certainly last.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I would like to thank everybody for the contributions, even where they are directly asking us to change our policy. I think it's a very healthy debate and something that we need to have. And I would encourage you all to connect with Mike about Labour Party conference, because I think hopefully at the moment it looks as though it's going to be real, like face to face. And I think that, we're well overdue, dusting off some of these themes in person. And I think that would actually be really helpful. And I think, as Marina and Alena have said, because it is an emotional topic, we don't have to be super rational about it. We can have a bit of a row without, our personality falling apart. But equally, it will give us the sort of staircase into how we can communicate our dream. And when we have a dream, and we can communicate that to voters, they will vote for it. But I think it's those steps that we need to make to get how we articulate what it is we've been talking about today, because part of our sort of social depression is about the fact that, we have been living in a kind of culture which has been quite difficult for our values around being an externally focused organisation, and failing to win that electorally. So a couple of specific points which have come up. The first one is really about the awareness in wider England and Scotland that business is suffering, and this is now coming right up the political agenda. And I think what we're seeing is, because furlough is still operational, a lot of people are out there spending their furlough money, and we're kind of living in an artificial environment. When furlough ends in September, if it ends, because obviously the Delta variant may be such that it's extended again, but at some point in the future, furlough will end, and then there will be a reckoning. And then suddenly the confluence of the loss and grief that we're actually feeling emotionally through coronavirus will collide with the reality of the contraction of the economy by 4%. What our colleague said about small business, don't forget small business is the lifeblood of the economy. And also some of those cultural issues around, you know, allowing the booing of our own England team. Those things will all collide, and I think we will then find our voice. And I'm hoping that it will all happen in advance of the 2023 or 24 election. And I do actually believe that because society and politics is very volatile at the moment, we do have an opportunity. I'm not one of these people who thinks this is so strategic that we have to wait 100 years before Labor gets elected again. I think it could all turn on its head quite quickly, but we have to be ready to catch that ball, and we have to be ready to play that game and get out of the blocks early and quickly. And I think that artificially held economy of the furlough is very much helping the government at the moment. I think the vaccine is part of that, but it's really the money in people's pockets. Very briefly also on the Australian trade deal, we know that the problem is about standards. It's all about whether the UK drops its standards and leaves the gold standard of the EU on food. And I just cannot believe the gift that Biden has given to this government of saying you can still have a trade deal provided that you don't mess up the relationship with Ireland. That's basically the deal. And yet, if Boris Johnson still turns his back from that and tries to get what he thinks of as more, then I think people will see through that. The offer from George Eustace, who is the farming minister, that you can have some money if you retire, either £50,000 or £100,000. What is that offer to the countryside and to the environment? Let's just not be farmers anymore. Let's not have our own agriculture. That is not where the country's at, whether you're a consumer in a city or whether you love the countryside and you've been an animal or welfare or wildlife husbander for your whole life. That is not what you voted for. That's not the promise you were given on Brexit. So, you know, as I say, these things will come forward as a bit of a clashing symbol. I think we're slightly ahead of the curve in a way because we're predicting what's going to happen. And it's not going to be a timing that chimes with by-elections or local elections, but there will be a coming realisation. I thought we glimpsed it actually about 10 days before the local elections when we saw some of the sort of lying behaviour, because we've got a lying culture within our government. They've lied about PPE, they lied about the care homes, they've lied about, you know, giving contracts to their friends. And all of those lies have been found out. But I think at the moment, some voters are still in that sort of period of not wanting to know because actually there's enough still happening where they feel their lives are okay because of the furlough arrangement. So I think there is a reckoning coming. And I also think that there's a kind of an emotional awakening that will happen in the next 12 to 18 months because we're a bit traumatized still and therefore still not really back into full campaigning mode. But when we eventually get back to a real sort of political mode where we can campaign fully, I think we will reap the benefits of a more dignified and a position that has integrity. I think Keir Starmer has integrity, and I think he's been very good at exposing the lies of this government, and we just need to reap that benefit so that we can articulate it both in policy terms, which Annalise is going to lead, but also we will be able to have that sketching out of those dreams which will get those people to the polls. Now, I don't want to sound overly optimistic, Mike, but I do feel that we are in a little bit of a sort of a phony war at the moment and that it is going to go our way, but also we can't just wait for things to fall into our laps. We have to start building those dreams now, and that's where it comes into here. So I can see Andrew Adonis wanting to come in, which would be good to hear him. And please email me with ideas and thoughts, and I will feed that back through Annalise and through the policy process. Because, you know, we've been talking a lot about sausages this week, but the Labour Party enjoys its sausage making of policy. So please put things forward to me so that I can feed those into Annalisa's strategy. And let's not lose the faith. We will get there in the end with our outwardly focused, you know, Britain is genuinely part of the world. And let's not boo when England goes and plays the football. It's all part of the same thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine and Marina and Alena. So good to hear from you all, and it's a very encouraging note to end on. Thank you, Catherine. And I too am an optimist. I mean, I'm convinced that we will be back in the EU and we'll be a leading nation of it again. And as you say, things are very volatile at the moment, and that could happen. We could get a Labour government